think coming out of the pandemic for us, because we are actually providers of care, so we're on the front lines, it's just right now, it's sheer exhaustion and change fatigue. So I think the other piece is a bit of the skill gap. So, we've made the journey to cloud, at least on the data and analytics front. And so it's making that adjustment in trying to fill that gap. It's really about taking small incremental approaches where we can, taking on and learning as we go, identifying those partnership opportunities, and then looking at, where it might be in our best interest to pursue managed services.
For us, it's really about simplification and modernization of our technology ecosystem, primarily by cloud and automation. To me, working with multiple CIOs and their teams, what I have learned is that the first roadblock for us really is either partial alignment or lack of alignment between the technology and the business leaders on what they call as success in the digital transformation journey. Then I would say, there's a big bang approach to doing things. One CIO thinks of doing it big bang, somebody's face, so they just don't align. The third is about talent gaps, like in certain areas like data and analytics, cloud, security. These are hot topics for us to get our, the FTEs ramped up. So it's very, very hard. We are a multi-vendor environment. So I think it becomes extremely hard to pace our change with our partners' change. So some of our vendor partners are slower, some are faster, depending upon the size and the layer of the stack they are involved in. There are some disjoint roadmaps between business and technology. And the big one is some of the cost promises that we have made. We are having some incorrect areas to begin with to take to focus on the cost takeouts, like application rationalization. These are tough topics. Rather, we should focus on more nimbler topics like operations to make our play.
I think when you look at oil and gas, we lag behind pretty much every other industry in terms of technological advancement and adoption. And so the maturity and capability of the organization and the people within the company needs to get to a certain point even to adopt technology. So we're talking about processes, getting consistent processes, and that's foundational to that transformational journey. I think the other two pieces around this is because there's been such a lack of investment across the board in technology in oil and gas, the big one here is the foundational technological gaps across the industry, and it needs to shift. So it can't just be one organization making the change. It actually needs to be a collective. And I think the third piece here is the rise of, I would say, commoditized or easy application implementation from vendors. It's a completely different ballgame now, where you don't have to go to your IT teams to develop any application. These vendors can come and say, hey, I'm going to set up shop. You don't even need to engage IT, and you can get the services that you need. So all of a sudden, you can get some good, quick wins that way. But all of a sudden, if everybody's doing that, it becomes fragmented. So now we have to think about governance. We have to think about structure, and how do we leverage that? It's not to stop it. How do we leverage that so that we grow together in a meaningful way with pace?
The business at Colliers has grown through excellence of service on a certain area, very close and tight to the customer. And so it's very entrepreneurial and it's very enterprising. And that is the value of it to the customer. But now we're sitting in a place where, you need to be able to give the customer more of a 360 view services on their property investment decision-making, on their office planning, on the future of, where they want to lease, where they want to sell, and all of that. And, sometimes these combination will need to be orchestrated more at a higher level across multiple business lines. So what we see is that the fragmented applications or solutions that were adopted, these are all causing us to not be able to fast and quick move on to where we want to be, which is being able to create that 360 on the business side for the business use.
We categorize technical debt into two kinds of debt. One is technology debt, which we focus on infrastructure. And then there's code debt that we focus on code that's legacy. Most of you can relate to COBOL code that's sitting out there that nobody's touched for a long time. And we address these two separately. And from an infrastructure perspective, we look at when we are migrating to the cloud, because besides running DevOps, we're also looking at adopting cloud as well as started our journey on the digital transformation. So we've got to keep our ears to the ground for all of those four aspects. So when we're migrating to the cloud, making sure, number one, we don't use the term migrating because people think it's a lift and shift. It's not. It requires refactoring code. It requires using the features that moving to the cloud offers you, using the right services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when we do address technology debt, we address it through that avenue. When we address code debt, we look at our DevOps metrics and try to focus on code that's high touch, maybe legacy, but still high touch with a lot of feature changes going in. And then you have the other type of code that is not high touch, but is legacy, and focus more on the high touch code, because the more we focus on that and reduce the debt, modernize that code, introduce new concepts like microservices, APIs, service virtualization, et cetera, we are able to modernize that code. But we tend to focus on the high touch areas by using the metrics that we collect in terms of how often changes are pushed, code quality, and other things that we are regularly looking at through the SDLC process. Those are the two areas we focus on in technical debt, and we try to maintain that. It is not an easy balancing act to do that, because there's always somebody whispering in your ear to focus on something else.
In many cases, the private sector had several tools and they just weren't in use. So this was enabling their technical portion to start using remote tools on the telecom side, which gave some of them a huge advantage. And referencing that same sort of idea on the public sector side is some of them had that already there, but they're not able to move because of budget and what have you, kind of what Kim was alluding to earlier with they were pressured because of COVID. So to add several new layers on to keep them busy, when they're busy enough and running with off their feet, they weren't going to add another layer of technology to learn while COVID is on. So although they may have the tools, they're not quite there yet, and they will look at getting there, but it's going to be a couple months once things settle down. Whereas the private sector on the telecom world, your technical debt is going to be, if it's not migrated already, there's been a huge push to work remote. And some of those staff members will not be going back to the office, which you can now offset some of your debt as opposed to covering some of the office space that when your lease expires, you might be dropping to 50% of your office space.
I believe the vendor community is often a detriment for customer success. Let me explain. When I was at Red Hat for 5 years, we would do an implementation of OpenShift. But if a customer would ask me to integrate Terraform, integrate Harness, integrate the other pieces that you need to be able to have a successful implementation, I would say, no, it's not my product. I can't do it. So you have to go to a different partner to do another piece of the journey, another piece of the journey, another piece of the journey. That's why I believe a lot of customers are struggling, because there's too many pieces that need to come together, and there's not one company who can pull it off properly. So that, to me, is one area. Skill set gap is everywhere. We see customer buying products from all kinds of different partners and vendors, and the adoption of the technology is very slow. You guys have not been able to integrate the technology properly into your stack. So that is a big problem. And the next one is the business case. People talked about budget being tight. We spend all the money on COVID. So everything is going to have to be justified with an OPEX or CapEx saving from a business case perspective. So I think there's a lot of projects that are also behind. It's going to be harder to showcase the ROI and get the business case approved. So I think that's kind of create delays into why digital transformation is slow and the journey to the cloud is slow.